Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Beckman's Breakdown, the show where I take a look at all of badminton's World Tour events from Super 500 up to Super 1000, including the majors and the team events. This week was the Malaysia Masters Super 500 and there's plenty to talk about. There's good stuff, there's bad stuff, and of course if you're a badminton fan you already know this, there's controversial stuff. But before I get into any of that, a quick reminder that if you want to purchase any of the Beckman's Breakdown merchandise that is now out and available, then you can just click on the link in the description below. I'll also pin a comment. There's still the opportunity to get 20% off your order, but that'll only last until the first 20 customers have bought stuff from the website. Anyway, like I said, let's get right into this because there's plenty to talk about. Starting with the first thing, a slightly bit of bad news. Now, maybe it's a bad thing to kick this episode off on a rather sad and sour note, but I want to start this way anyway because this was very upsetting to me, very heartbreaking, very gut-wrenching, and that is that Ng Tze Yong, the Malaysian men's singles player who has just come back, or just started to come back from major back injury. He had a surgery last year. He'd been out all of 2024 and most of 2025. He's only come back at the Asia Championships only a few weeks ago. And he has sadly suffered another injury, this time to his knee. Now, let me just give a little bit of a backstory here so you can really get the full picture. I can remember first seeing Ng Tze Yong during lockdown. It was during, I think, BAM put on some internal tournaments. Obviously keep the players motivated, keep things interesting at a time where there was no competition on. And they streamed this on their YouTube channel. And I can remember watching Ng Tze Yong, and he won the event, I'm pretty sure he did anyway. And I was just drawn to him. There was something about the way he played that I just saw that he had something special. He's a very slight and slim player, but just the way that he approached the game, the skills he had, his footwork, his technical skills, everything just... It wasn't just because he won the tournament, it was actually, I noticed him long before then. He just was a player that I immediately thought, okay, he has got some potential. And he kind of showed this potential after lockdown happened. We started to see him nicely progress. You know, started to build up some physical strength. He started to do well at the international series and challenge tournaments, started to win, climb his ranking up. Then we started to see him playing in more of the senior world tour tournaments. And gradually, every time I watched him play, he seemed to be getting better and better. In 2022, he got to the final of the Commonwealth Games and had a brilliant tournament there. And I think it was at the 2023 All England where he made his true splash. And that was when he beat Victor Axelsen in the first round, I think it was actually, in an absolutely fantastic win. A real surprise and the kind of shock of the tournament. He went on to make the quarterfinals where he lost to the eventual winner Li Shifeng. But anyway, all of that aside, like I said, he impressed me and really stood out to me when I first saw him around 2020, 2021. And then over the next 2 to 3 years, he really was pushing on and it seemed that there was building a little bit of a rivalry between, not rivalry, but a little bit of competition for Lee Jia, who had been the Malaysian #1 for a little bit of time. And there was even in the build up to the Paris Olympics, people were thinking, oh, maybe Ng Tze Yong might even qualify ahead, or maybe Malaysia would have 2 players qualifying for the Paris Olympics. But sadly, at the 2024 Malaysia Open, so last January, he had to withdraw in his first round match because of his back injury. At the time, him and his coaches felt that it was an injury that might put him out for a little bit of a period of time. Nothing too serious, nothing to worry about majorly, and they still had high hopes that he could qualify for the Paris Olympics. But as it transpired, the injury turned out to be pretty severe. He actually had to require surgery, and as a result, only, I'd say, a year later was there talks about him potentially returning. I think a lot of it was that he wasn't just that physically he needed that amount of time to recover from surgery and from his injuries, but I think it left quite a lot of psychological damage as well. And I think I can remember reading early reports that he was struggling to kind of mentally, is he feeling ready, or if he plays, is he going to re-hurt it? There was that kind of worry, which can happen to players after they go through such a major and traumatic injury as Ng Tze Yong did. But all that being said, at this year's Asian Championships, he did come back. He had a tough match, a tough first round against Kanut, who went on to win the tournament. And I think from that tournament, and I think we played in Taipei in Thailand, or he played in Taipei. I can't remember which tournaments he played, but his kind of recovery was slow, which is to be expected. He had been out for so long. Even if he had been able to be training, he wasn't going to be at full fitness. And you know, just things like this, it takes time to get your game back, to get your confidence back, to get your belief back, just to find your feet on the world stage, which is why it was so good. And this week in Malaysia, in the first round when he was playing Angus, the crowd got very excited because not only was he actually playing well, but he won the first game 22-20 and made a pretty solid start to the second, going quickly 4-1 up. Playing some really good stuff, and I think the crowd, obviously knowing his story, him being Malaysian, playing in Malaysia, the crowd were really getting behind him. And then at 4-3, I think it was, or 4-2 in the second game, Long fired a smash at Ng Tze Yong's body. He tried to sway out of the way like this, and his right knee slightly caved in. He sat down on the ground, and immediately you could see there was this kind of, although it was on the streaming court, and the quality of those, as you know, for BWF aren't particularly good, you could see that he was a little bit, so something must have felt a bit off. The coach behind the court, Kenny Onison, and I don't know who the other coach was, were kind of oblivious to this. They were kind of like, okay, he's just sitting on the floor because that's just the way the rally ended. It was only when Ng Tze Yong turned around and gave him this kind of ominous look that suddenly you can see Kenny Onison go, oh no, okay, something's happened. And yeah, something had happened. Obviously, I'm not quite sure what it was, but something with his knee. The doctors were called on court, and whilst he was able to get up and walk around, albeit hobbling, which was good, he didn't need to be taken off court in a wheelchair. He clearly knew that he wasn't able to continue, so had to retire from the match. So yeah, no, a real gut-wrenching, because I've been a big fan of Ng Tze Yong for years. Anyone who's followed me on Instagram since I first started posting regularly know how much of a fan I am of his game. And just as he was starting to show signs that he was finding his feet, there's another injury issue. Now, there is some good news, and that is, I think since then it's turned out to be a strain to his knee, so nothing too serious. He hasn't kind of torn an MCL or done any major ligament damage in there, and it seems there's been reports that maybe it's going to take at least 2 weeks minimum, 2 to 4 weeks, something along those lines. And I really do hope that that is it, because let's cast our mind back to last year, with his back injury, where they initially thought it wouldn't take too long to recover, but turned out to be far more serious. I really do hope that this time the initial diagnosis, is actually correct, because I want to see Ng Tze Yong back. I'm sure a lot of Malaysian fans do. He's absolutely brilliant. I think he's a real talent and still has potential to become a very good player and create a lot of success for himself and for Malaysia. And also with the way that Malaysia has been developing their male squads, they've got so many men's doubles players. I'll talk about that next, actually. But with obviously Lee Ji-jar as their top guy, players like Lung Junhao, Eugene E, etc. Players like that, I think they could have a really strong Thomas Cup team, a very strong Thomas Cup squad, and one that's very capable of not just medaling, but winning the Thomas Cup. I really do believe that, and I think Ng Tze Yong is going to be a vital part. But beyond all that, just for his sake, I really hope this isn't anything too serious. I hope this doesn't not just physically knock him, but psychologically knock him too much too. I wish him nothing but a speedy recovery, and I hope, and I'm sure you'll all watching this join me in saying that we hope to see him back on court as soon as possible. Right, okay, so the next thing I'll talk about is the unfortunate issue that happened during the men's doubles, the controversial issue, one that has kind of dominated the headlines throughout this whole week at the Malaysia Masters, and it's one that I think most people will be expecting me to talk about. Now, it is obviously being controversial, it's a little bit tricky to talk about, and that's also because there was some implications made that it wasn't just a bad line call or a bad umpire's decision, but that there was some bias involved, some racial bias to be more precise. So I think as a result, it's obviously quite a difficult topic to talk about, and I think the best way that I can do it is just by kind of laying out the facts, telling you what happened and then trying to give my opinion on it. This situation happened in the second round men's doubles match between Frederik Sogaard and Rasmus Kjaer of Denmark and Aaron and Kang of Malaysia, a very young and very talented Malaysian pair that I'm confident we will see plenty more of in the future. Now, all this controversy did actually happen within the third game. Up until that point, it was a very exciting and entertaining match. The Danes won the first game very comfortably, but then the Malaysians were able to find their feet, and in extra points, 26-24 in the second, they were able to win it and send it into a third game. Understandably, the crowd were incredibly excited. They were getting very loud inside the Axiata Arena, seeing one of their young new pairs doing so well and potentially obviously putting themselves in a position to make the quarter-finals. But sadly, right at the beginning of the third game is when the contrary happened. 1-love, to be precise, to the Malaysians. At 1-love, I can't remember who was serving, but the Malaysians did a flick serve down the line, and it landed very near the corner where the rear double service line and the centre line meet. The rear linesman called it in, but as it's the only in the second round, there was no Hawkeye and no centre lines judge. Then it was up to the umpire to make that call. The umpire called it out, which, you know, the Malaysians did protest. They felt it was in, and watching it, it was incredibly close, a very tight line call. I think if that was all it was, then I think this would be no issue. These kind of calls, the umpire has to make it. There's no Hawkeye that he can rely on. He made the decision whether it was in or out. I think he would have moved on. But it's what happened next, a few points later at 6-5, that for me was a dubious call and really started to kickstart this whole controversy. At 6-5, the Malaysians hit a lift that went to the back line. The Danes left it, and the linesman called it in. However, the umpire overruled it and called it out. Now, the reason why this is a dubious one and a very controversial is that since Hawkeye has been implemented in badminton, I know it wasn't on this court, but since it's been implemented in general, I can't recall a single time that an umpire has overruled a linesman's decision. Possibly there might have been some on a line very close, you know, the sideline right by where the umpire is sitting, but rarely would you see them overrule one, especially on a back line where, you know, their vision, although they're right by the court, it is quite difficult to see, especially if it's a close one. So usually in those situations, they will go with what the linesman has decided. In fact, if I just pull it back slightly, at 23 all in the second game, the Malaysians left one on the back line that was called in. They thought it was out, and the umpire said that the linesman decision will stand. I think that actually did have a little bit of an effect in that 6-5 decision as well, and why the Malaysians were more upset and why it played off as it did. So yeah, 1-love, a dubious line call, a difficult line call, but really for me, not much of a bad decision. I wouldn't call that a bad one. The overruling one at 6-5 was a dubious decision in my opinion, because we just don't see it very often, and the fact that the umpire probably wouldn't have had that clear a view of that line, that I'm surprised that he didn't just go with what the linesman had decided. But that wasn't the big one. The big one came at 14-12, and that was when Rasmus Kjaer hit a drive shot at Aaron Tai. Aaron Tai dodged it out the way, and it clearly landed out. Even on the BWF stream, you can see where the shuttle landed far behind the line. And another thing you could see was that Aaron Tai got quite clearly out of the way of the shuttle. However, the umpire saw it differently. He felt that the shuttle had brushed Aaron Tai's face or ear on the way through. And obviously this decision was the one that, it was like the straw that broke the camel's back. The players protested again, and this time the coach is Herry IP, and I'm not quite sure who the other coach was sitting next to him, but both stood up immediately. Both were very angry and upset. Both came all the way up to the umpire and had words. Tournament referee was called on, which in all honesty, if I want to talk about that, I'm not quite sure why those kind of things happen, why the tournament referee is called on, because in all honesty, they have literally no power to do anything about it. Every single time you see a tournament referee called on about some sort of controversial decision or an umpire decision that the players or the coaches feel they've got wrong, the tournament referee does nothing. He has words with the umpire, the decision stands, and the game moves on. So I'm not quite sure, maybe that's something that should be looked at, should be changed possibly. But I think really what this brings up more, I'll get on, there's a few other things, but obviously brings up the age-old topic of, the age-old question of badminton should have a VAR system. Obviously Hawkeye has eradicated in essence a number of these issues for line calls, which to be honest was probably the biggest area in which there were a lot of controversial situations within badminton games ever since badminton started. Line calls have been where the most controversy has lay. Obviously now with Hawkeye that's almost been eradicated, but there have now been over the last few years a number of umpire decisions, whether it's faults to the net or situations like this where the logic dictates that if you had a VAR system where you could have a quick review, you could have seen that, you know, a decision like this by the umpire could be overruled or changed. And in this case, in my own opinion, I think it was a wrong decision by the umpire. So yeah, what obviously inflamed this whole situation even further was actually what was said in an interview after the match, an interview with Herry IP, the Malaysian men's doubles coach. He was asked, what did he say to the umpire when he went over to him to speak to him? And Herry was, you know, very forthcoming, didn't put any sort of sugarcoating on it. He said that, basically, he said that this was 3 times now that the umpire had made a decision, a 3 times decision in the favour of the Danes, and in against the Malaysians, and quite simply said, is it because you like white people?
Not fair, because you like white people.
Implying that there was some sort of racial bias, some bias behind his decisions. I must say, Herry also did say, he did essentially say this, had this happened once, or maybe even twice, okay, that, you know, we all make mistakes, but 3 times kind of shows a pattern, and that's why he said what he said. Now, I must admit, when I saw that interview, I was a little surprised at Herry's words, quite shocking. It's quite an accusation to level against someone, but I do understand where he's coming from. You know, like you say, 1 mistake, okay, we make them 2, okay, but 3 times and in very quick succession, I can understand where Herry came from. And also, whilst I did think that someone with such experience like Herry has, he's been within the badminton world for 20-something years, almost 25 years in fact, that he's probably witnessed quite a number of bad decisions, that he might have been able to kind of control himself and not actually say those words. Maybe think it, but not actually say it. But again, I kind of understand he's in that heat of that moment. You know, you're so passionate, you want your players to win, and when 3 decisions so quickly happen like that, and like you say, it does show a pattern, I kind of understand where he was coming from. My opinion on this, I think it's impossible to say whether there's bias there or whether it was just 3 genuine mistakes, although I would say the first one, I wouldn't classify that as a mistake. We don't know whether that was in or out. We don't have Hawkeye. For me, it's the second 2. The overruling is a dubious call, and that third one, for me, it was clear as day that it didn't hit Aaron Tai in the face. Yeah, like I said, I don't know this guy personally. I know he's from Switzerland. That's about all it is. So I think it's unfair of me and not right for me to speculate any further, to kind of inflame the situation more. All I can say is that I understand where the Malaysians' frustration is from, both in terms of the players, the coaches, and of course the crowd as well. One thing that has come from this, and I think another reason why I don't want to speculate, is because BAM after the match did put in an official complaint towards the BWF about the umpire's umpiring, about his decisions. They felt it was erroneous, and I think this is a great thing. I think this is something that should be looked into, should be investigated, and I just genuinely hope that the whole process is kept transparent, and that the results are made public to everyone so that we can understand the situation and what was actually found out. Because, like I said, at the moment, I don't think I can, on hand on heart, say it was a racial bias that the umpire had. I can definitely say that I think that his final decision was a wrong one. and the decision at 6-5 was a dubious one. I think anything more than that would just be not right of me to say, and so yeah, I think that's where I'll leave that controversial decision. That's where I want to kind of leave that out in terms of the controversy itself. Obviously, this whole situation did have quite an impact on the Malaysian players. After the match, it was quite clear when being interviewed that Kang was visibly upset. Understandably so. He was playing so well, him and Aaron playing well. They had such a great opportunity to get into the quarterfinals. It would have been their best result so far in their career, and to do it on home soil. To have that kind of, to feel like that's been taken away from you because you feel you've been cheated, I understand why he was so upset. But he did actually say something that showed a lot of character, and that was that he said he was going to use this whole situation to learn from and come back even stronger, which I think was a really good thing of him to say, and shows great maturity for someone so young. Another thing that I felt that actually showed maturity from both players was that after that decision at 14-12, obviously the crowd were very upset, they were getting very vocal, and they all started to put their, not only boo, but they started to put it on their torches, on their cameras, especially on the side facing the Danes, trying to obviously distract them and put them off, etc. And whilst I understand the anger from the crowd, Aaron and Kang both turned around and telling the crowd to turn their switches off, to turn their torches off, that, you know, play can't continue until you do so, and also it's just not fair for anyone. And I think this kind of backs up something that Aaron Tai, who faced Rasmus and Frederik in the next round, said after that match, and that was that we shouldn't put blame, or we shouldn't put any sort of blame or negative stuff towards the players involved. This was an umpire's decision. This has nothing to do with the players themselves, which I think, again, is another great statement to make. What's in a way disappointing, and what I try to comment about on social media myself, is that it's a shame that this situation happened, because it really completely took away from what was a fantastic match. The Danes were playing well, the Malaysians were showing what they're capable of because they're incredibly talented, and this match had everything going for it. It was so exciting, and so for it to end the way it did just is a real shame for me, a real shame, and especially for Kang and Aaron. Yeah, no, I do apologise before I move on if this section has been a bit muddled. It's a complicated one, and I hope I've done the best and been respectful to all parties. There's been so much to talk about. My head's been swirling ever since this happened. I've been thinking, how the hell am I going to talk about this? Because there's just so many, it's going to bring up so many raw emotions in people, and people are going to react to every little thing that is said about the situation, including what I'm going to say in this video. So I really hope this doesn't come across in any bad way. Let me just reiterate by saying that I felt the umpires' decisions were wrong, especially the final one, and I felt the overruling was dubious at best. I won't like to say whether it was racially motivated or there was some sort of bias in that way, because I don't know the guy personally, and that's for the investigation, which is hopefully being taken by BWF to find out. That's not for me to speculate on and try and stir any fires. I will say that it's a shame that this match was kind of not ruined, but you know, the quality of the match has been taken. What we remembered of this match is that situation, and not the fact that it was a brilliant match between two really good pairs, a very talented young Malaysian pair and a Danish pair that are always improving. And I do want to make it abundantly clear, and I think Aaron Tai said this after they defeated Frederik and Rasmus, and that is that we shouldn't take these situations out on the players themselves. It wasn't them that made this decision, and as far as I could see, they didn't try to get too heavily involved. As soon as it was all kicking off, they moved away, and if anyone says, well, they were kind of going, oh, did he touch it? In all these situations, players always look at the umpire to maybe go, was that a fault? And then most of the time when the umpire go no or yes, it's not them trying to necessarily influence the decision. That happens all the time from absolutely, well, most players. So and of course, it did inspire Aaron Tai and So Yik, and I think it also motivated and inspired the other Malaysian pair, Man and T, and as a result, it was I thought it was nice that it ended this tournament with an all-Malaysian final. So yeah, no, I really hope that I have covered this well. I have rambled on a little bit, and I think it's best now if I just move on to other things within this tournament, some rather more positive things. I think from here on out, it's predominantly going to be positive stuff. Okay, so sticking with Malaysia and kind of carrying on, I did kind of talk about this a little bit in the last section, but obviously it was an all-Malaysian men's doubles final, and as a result that meant that Malaysia were obviously guaranteed a winner in the men's doubles event, something which hadn't happened in 12 years. So Malaysian fans would have been absolutely ecstatic at that. The final was won by Ng Tze, and what a turnaround for them, because last week in Thailand, they lost to the young Danish pair that kind of surprised the whole tournament, Bo and Kjaer. And I watched that match and I didn't think they played particularly well. But this week in Malaysia, they completely 180'd it. They were absolutely brilliant. They were really solid throughout. They were attacking really well. And I felt especially because I watched, more specifically, I did watch their semi-final against Hoki and Kobayashi, which I thought would be a really interesting match, as Hoki and Kobayashi have been playing pretty well so far in this tournament, but Ng Tze absolutely took them apart. It almost looked like they were playing, the shuttle was the size of a beach ball for them. They're pushing up the court, their attack, their drives from just above and just below tape were absolutely amazing. They attacked well, they defended well, dominated the net. They just did absolutely everything perfectly, and I think they carried that form on into the final. As for Aaron Tai and So Yik, as I said, they avenged Kang and Aaron in the quarterfinals with one of the most inspired and motivated performances I've ever seen from them, especially So Yik. And then in the semi-final, let's play another Danish pair, Ashby and Rasmussen. That motivation and inspiration carried on, and that was an absolutely fantastic semi-final. It was one of my favourite matches to watch in the whole tournament. There was definitely some tension in the air, not a personal tension between the pairs, but I felt that there was obviously a lot on the line. I think the Danes, obviously, with the whole situation that had been going on, and obviously they were trying to fight to get themselves back into some form because they've really been struggling this year, and obviously Aaron Tai was so desperate to make the final and to beat another Danish pair. I think there was a lot of there was some really great rallies and some absolutely fantastic stuff, but there was a lot of mishits from all players. You know, they'd have opportunities to intercept, and there was some stuff coming off the frame and all sorts. But I think what ultimately decided this match was, I think the Malaysians were just that little bit. They were obviously just that little bit better. They made slightly less mistakes. That start they got at the third game was absolutely key. And I felt that, not to pinpoint one person, but Kim Astrup was a little bit loose at the front court. When he's playing well, he's probably one of the best front court players there are in men's doubles. He can definitely make the difference for this pair, Ashby and Rasmussen. But there were just a few times he did play some absolutely brilliant stuff. There was some really inspired play, but there were moments where some of his little nets from below tape were just a little bit loose, and able to get the Malaysians were able to get on top of the rallies and dominate from there. And I think also playing into that, Aaron Tai exposed that a little bit when he was serving. He'd serve kind of, because Kim's like this, he'd serve in at him a few times and they were able to get in certain situations. Also, within the rally, Kim Astrup can sometimes be a little bit forehand dominant in his defence, in his flat game, and the Malaysians were able to angle it in at his backhand a little bit quite often and kind of get the weaker shots. But yeah, it was an absolutely brilliant game. It was really good to see Aaron Tai and So Yik back up what they did at the Asian Championships, back up what they did in Thailand, and obviously do so here. And it was also really good to see the Danes in the semi-finals, because like I said, they've been really struggling, mainly because Anders Rasmussen's elbow injury. In terms of the final, I'll be honest, I didn't watch all too much of it. I did watch some highlights from a lot of the finals, but because 4 of the 5 finals were same nations, I just wasn't as excited, and there wasn't as much interest personally for me as there was for the semi-finals and the quarter-finals, where there was these battles like I talked about. The Aaron Tai and So Yik versus Ashby Rasmussen just had me like, oh, this could be a real match here. The crowd's gonna be really onto this one. Whereas the same nation stuff, I think the crowd did get a little bit excited when games got close or there was good rallies. Obviously, they appreciated the good points, or when towards the end of the matches. So for example, in the women's singles, only when it got to like 18 all did the crowd really get kind of excited. You could hear them audibly. So yeah, no, really good for Malaysia for an all-Malaysian final, first winners of this title in 12 years, and just with everything that had gone earlier in the year, like I said, earlier in the tournament, I felt it was almost like a nice little thing, a justice thing, and I liked the podium shot of both pairs and Herry IP, the other coaches. I just thought that was really, really nice. So yeah, that's enough of me talking about Malaysia. I think I've spoken about them and their players a little bit enough. I might end up mentioning one other Malaysian pair a bit later on, but we'll see. Let's move on. I'm going to talk about something a little bit different now. Okay, so moving on, the next thing I want to talk about is Kodai Naraoka, Japan's top men's singles player. And the reason I want to talk about Kodai Naraoka, he did reach these semi-finals here, losing to a very well-playing Li Shifeng. But it's the way that he played during this week that has stood out to me. Because Kodai Naraoka is synonymous with long drawn-out rallies, casual backhands, and going to 3 games. Yet, at this Malaysia Masters, it was almost the opposite of that. He actually, before he lost to Li Shifeng, he'd won his first 3 rounds in straight games, and he'd been playing with a far more attacking style. And so I was left going, not only was I like, this is really good, and this is kind of what I think Kodai Naraoka, I've always said this, and I think a lot of people share my opinion, this is what he needs to do to get much more consistent results and to take the next level or 2 up. I mean, that sounds ridiculous because he is a world finalist and he's been in the final and won World Tour events. But if he wants to be like someone who's like a top 3 player, consistently being a major threat for the big tournaments, I think adding this layer on to his game is definitely, adding an attacking element to his game is something that needs to be done. I've likened him to Akane Yamaguchi in the women's singles, and a player who's quite short in stature. Kodai Naraoka for men's singles players, quite short in stature. Very fast around the court, very good retrieval skills, very good racket skills, and all that stuff. But when Yamaguchi got her best results, most consistent results, probably a few years back, was when she added an attacking element to her game, when she started to kind of, in her own style. It wasn't like she suddenly started hitting really big smashes, and it's the same with Naraoka, but it's more like started to actually use sharp attacks, started to try to be a little bit more proactive from the front court to create opportunities, not just sitting back and reacting to what their opponent does and just relying heavily on physical, like lung-wise, but also being able to kind of chase shuttles and just kind of nullify the game with slow drops and high clears and all this stuff. When Yamaguchi added that layer to her, it made her far more dangerous because she not only could retrieve shuttles all day long, but an opponent knew that if they hit something slightly short, she could put it on the ground, or could at least apply lots of pressure to her opponent, and they couldn't just kind of, there was less of a safety net when they played her. And Naraoka in the men's singles, I think it's even more important in men's singles that you have some sort of attack, is in that exact same boat. And that's why when I watched him play in Malaysia Masters, I was like, yes, really good, he's finally doing it. Now, I will say, finally doing it might be the wrong way of putting it, because I felt after the Olympic Games, I did see him start to look like he was playing a few attacking shots, or at least try to be a bit more proactive in his style. I can remember having a few conversations with people going, this is going to take him a little bit longer to get it really good, but he's on the right path. But then when we hit early 2025, it seemed like he'd reverted a little bit. All those things that I thought were good after the Olympics had kind of gone, and it was kind of frustrating to watch him play. But this week in Malaysia, we saw it. We saw it again, and I really hope that he takes this forward, because he has got a really good fast attack. He's obviously not going to be like a super powerful smasher, a bit like Yamaguchi, but his ability to change angles and vary pace and all that kind of stuff, and his control of a shuttle is absolutely brilliant. And then add to the fact that he can obviously chase shuttles down and play long, grueling rallies. Just that whole element, the fact that he can inject pace, by being more attacking, he can inject pace into rallies and all this kind of stuff. It just adds more and more layers, makes him more and more dangerous, and as a result, not only is he going to beat more and more players, but he'll beat them a little bit easier and have more energy at the key stages at the end of tournaments. So it's all good stuff for him. One thing I will say when it came to his semi-final, there was one person who posted on my Instagram, or posted a comment, because I did do a post on Naraoka, said that when he basically said that when he plays against one of the top guys like a Li Shifeng, would he revert back to his old ways? And then posted during the match that he had. I watched the match and I'd have to disagree a little bit. There were odd moments where he did revert back, but for the vast majority of the first game, and I felt for the second half of the second game, he was still trying to do a more proactive and attacking style. But the difference is, in his other matches, the players that he was up against weren't quite as solid or weren't quite as getting as good a length. His lifting and his control around the court, which was so good that I don't think Naraoka, there was no real opportunities for him to attack. He was trying to do things, trying to kind of unsettle him from the front court, maybe get him slight off balance, which might cause a short lift, but it was proving very difficult because Li Shifeng was so solid, so stable, that it was difficult to get him out of balance to be able to play a poor shot, and Li Shifeng carried that into the final as well, and it played that way all the way through the tournament. So yeah, in terms of Naraoka, I really do hope that he continues to try to do this, because not only is it more interesting to watch, but I think in terms of his own success, I think it can only bring good results for him. And it's going to be interesting to see how he plays in Singapore and Indonesia, two events that you do have to be a bit more attacking because they're so drifty. If you try and sit back and just hit really good, like quality shots, is so difficult because of the drift. You need to be the proactive player to maintain control. So it's going to be interesting. I do think actually one tournament that Naraoka did show a slightly more aggressive style in last year was actually at Singapore. So it'll be interesting to see if he carries that on into the next two tournaments and beyond. So yeah, let's keep our eyes peeled on how Naraoka develops moving forward. Okay, so sticking with men's singles, I have to talk about Srikanth Kidambi, the guy who got to the final. An absolutely brilliant tournament for him, one that's kind of come out of the blue, and that is because Srikanth is a former world #1. You know, a really entertaining player to play. He was also very, very key in India winning the Thomas Cup in 2022. But in all honesty, the last couple of years, he's really been struggling. And I think outside of a few odd results, he hasn't pushed on from what people expected of him from, say, just before lockdown till now. Like, they probably would have looked at him back then and thought that he should be someone that should have had a few more major medals or a few more titles to his name, or been someone that should be consistently in the top 5 or top 10. That hasn't been the case. In fact, right now for this tournament, he had to come through the qualifying because he's ranked, I think he's ranked 75 in the world right now. It's either 65 or 75. I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but regardless, like I said, as it meant for this week and last week, he's had to come through the qualifying. And so yeah, this result has come out of nowhere because last week at Thailand Masters he lost in the qualifying, and so for this week to come through the qualifying and then make it all the way to the final, absolutely fantastic. I've obviously had a lot of people ask questions about Srikanth. Where's this result come from? What has he done differently? Etc, etc. There's a couple of things that I want to talk about when it comes to Srikanth, and one goes a little bit further back, like I alluded to. The reason why I don't think that he was able to push on and be as consistent as maybe he promised to be. You know, he's always been such a talent. And for me, the biggest thing is that when he first burst onto the scene, he had such a great attack, an unbelievable front court control, especially his net shots. You know, one of the best players from the front court in world badminton in men's singles. But what I felt that kind of as he progressed, I think one thing was that he started to play almost like he was thinking a little bit too much. I think he was too much in his own head, almost trying to play too perfectly. When I first watched him play, he was very fast, very attacking, but he threw caution to the wind. He was willing to take on shots. He was willing to kind of take slightly risks. If it was a 50-50, there were times where he wouldn't take on the slightly harder option, but there were also times where he would. So there's always this danger to his game. But I felt that for a vast period, whenever he was in those situations, he would always take on the slightly safer option. Like, he wasn't playing with the kind of style that I felt made him so good and so exciting to watch. And actually that's kind of what he did better this week. What was really noticeable was that, Srikanth's always had lovely footwork, always had great attacking skills, always had great skills in general. But like I said, there were a lot of times where he wouldn't really use them. He would play very safe, he would play within himself, he would almost play, like I said, like he was in his own head too much, like trying to almost play too perfectly, rather than throwing a little bit of caution to the wind. And this week in Malaysia, I started to see more of that. There were times where he was slightly below tape, and he would take on the drive with a reverse action, no less, which is an incredibly difficult thing to do, but something that he's always been capable of. Like I said, from that situation, he is one of the best players. I would actually say that one of the first players I ever saw be able to play attacking shots from slightly below tape that would kind of go over the net like this was Taufik Hidayat, especially with like the reverse action, both forehand and backhand, as well as going in to out. And Srikanth has the ability to do that, and I haven't seen it from him enough, except for this week. Suddenly I started to see all that, and I think obviously winning a few games and doing well, getting a little bit deeper into tournaments, you started to see more confidence, that return to him. That for me is kind of the easiest way to explain how he was able to do this and what was slightly different. Now, I do know that in regards to Srikanth of late, he has had injury issues. Last year, I think he was out for almost half a year with an ankle injury, but he continued because his sheer love for the game. So he obviously, within that period, like I said, where I felt like his level's been a bit down, a bit inconsistent, there has been injury issues. But I think outside of that, like I said, I felt like, I don't know if I'm explaining this well enough, but it was almost like he was in his own head trying to play too perfectly, too nicely, and not throwing enough caution to the wind. I know that comes with risk, but Srikanth has always had that ability to do that. Another branch off of that is that I rarely saw Srikanth, and I'm thinking now to watching him over the last 5-6 years, there's barely been times I can remember where he would really inject pace into the game. Whether it's like getting up and doing a sudden sharp attack and coming forward. Again, that just was something that, for whatever reason, he wasn't doing as much. Yet in this week in Malaysia, I started to see it again, and it's really exciting. If he can obviously take huge confidence away from this tournament and start to try to do that a little bit more, even if sometimes he loses a few games, if he loses a few early rounds trying it, I think still it's going to be a positive thing, because that's where his game lies. If he just tries to play this basic simple game, there are other players that are just better than him, and Srikanth is a natural attacking player, and so he needs to use that. Of course, he needs that solid base game. He needs to be able to rally it. That's just part and parcel of men's singles, but he needs to maintain that element of danger. But I think that over, like I said, the last 5-6 years, that just hasn't been there enough. But I saw it here in Malaysia. So yeah, absolutely brilliant, really good to see. Obviously, I don't think he's going to be playing in Singapore and Indonesia. His ranking's not high enough. But there are a few 300s. There's a little break off, and I think there's some 300s and 500s later in the year that we might be able to see him start to play again. And hopefully he can reclimb the rankings. He is 32, so he's getting on a little bit, but I still think what he showed this week shows that he's still got a few more good years left in him, possibly another Olympic cycle. And what's to say, if he can do this a little bit more consistently and show the kind of level that he showed this week in Malaysia, that we can't see him back in amongst the top 32 and playing the biggest tournaments, and possibly even more than that. And one final thing, obviously, because it leads nicely onto the next section where I want to talk about the Chinese players in general. Obviously, the final against Li Shifeng, Srikanth did lose 11-9. Obviously, a little bit one-sided, but I think really I could chalk that up to probably a little bit of fatigue on Srikanth's behalf. I think having played all the way through qualifying, he had a number of tough matches, a lot of close matches, to get to that final, I think he was physically rather exhausted. And if you couple that with the fact that Li Shifeng was fresher and playing incredibly solid badminton, I think it's really mentally hard when you're feeling maybe a little bit fatigued and your opponent across the court is not only they're fresher than you, but they're just playing super solid and they give off that aura that you have to play absolutely brilliant. You have to be physically 100% ready. And so I'm not surprised that Srikanth wasn't able to rise his game a little more. He did try, you could see, but I think also Srikanth fell a little bit towards what Naraoka did. Was that Li Shifeng's general control and line and length and all that kind of stuff was just really on a whole other level, and the fact that Li Shifeng's attacks were penetrating Srikanth's defence, which has always been a slightly weaker area of Srikanth's game, his defence. He was put into a defence situation a little bit more often than he had in previous games. I think just all of that culminated in why the final was a little bit one-sided, but still that shouldn't take away from what was obviously a fantastic week. Okay, so the last section I want to talk about before I get onto a couple of questions from you guys is China. There's a few things I want to talk about here. I'm going to make this brief because there's obviously plenty to talk about, and that is that aside from Shi Yuqi, China brought all their players back. We saw a few of them last week. We saw Chen Yufei last week. She didn't play this week, but we did obviously see their top mixed doubles pairs. We saw them again. Obviously, they was another all-Chinese mixed doubles final. Obviously, China are, obviously, as we know, incredibly good at the mixed doubles. But outside of that, really, aside from one pair, which I'll get to at the end, all the players that China brought to this event were absolutely brilliant. And that just shows it was an all-China women's singles final between the top two Chinese players. I've already said all-China mixed doubles final. It was an all-China women's doubles final. And Li Shifeng won the men's singles. And I think had Shi Yuqi turned up, based on just how good the rest of the Chinese team were, and had they been in opposite halves, all likely it would have been an all-Chinese men's singles final as well. Absolutely brilliantly, absolutely amazing. I've already spoken about Li Shifeng, but one other thing that I didn't mention in his final is one thing that was very noticeable for me was that he had far less strapping. Over the last few tournaments, he's had very colourful strapping all the way up both legs, almost from top of his thigh all the way down to his ankles. At this tournament, he only had a little bit around his knee. So that means that maybe he has had a few injury issues that he's finally managed to get under control. It did show in the way that he played. He looked far more confident moving around the court. He was, the guy is a physical specimen, very strong, very powerful. We all saw that when he won the All England a couple of years ago. But I think he's been struggling with foot issues and other injuries. So the fact that he had less strapping and just looked really confident and strong, that's a promising sign for any Li Shifeng fans out there. Another player that has been showing signs of an injury but didn't show them too much this week is Zhang Shushan. For the last, I can't even remember how long, she's been wearing a back support on the outside of her shirt. But obviously at this tournament, I think she might have started the week with a back support in the usual place. But definitely by semi-finals onwards, no longer did we see that support on her back. And I did think that although she still doesn't have the biggest smash in the world, she was able to hit the shuttle a little bit harder and was moving around the court a little bit more freely. So maybe that back issue that she's been having has also started to heal, or the coaches or the physical trainers have managed to get that a little bit more under control, which is absolutely fantastic. Obviously, like I said, it was an all-Chinese mixed doubles final. There was 3 Chinese mixed pairs in the semis again, and China had another new pair that were playing in the semi-finals. Feng and Wang, another back-to-back win, showing a really good week for Feng Yanzhou and Wang Dongping. I think for me, like their win over Dichapon and Supsara, there was all matches like that just showed again that Feng Yanzhou, just to kind of hammer home what I said, that he seems to turn a leaf and become far mentally stronger. Wang Ziyi and Han Yue had an absolutely brutal final, lots of long rallies. Wang Ziyi was playing the sort of badminton that we didn't quite see from her at the Sudirman Cup, but what we'd seen of her earlier in the year. But for me, it was Han Yue that really stood out, just physically looking far stronger, far more sturdy, especially to her round the head corner. I felt that she's always had a very very good attack from that corner, but sometimes not quite able to get around the shuttle to use those shots as often as should be, or when she gets there isn't quite as stable to play them as good or to recover from them, but clearly has been working hard on that, and her overall footwork looks far sturdier and far stronger. All of this makes me very, very excited to see the return of Xu Qi next week, because if he comes in on the sort of form that the other Chinese players showed this week in Malaysia, then with the way that he's been playing already this year, we're going to see something absolutely amazing from him in Singapore and Indonesia. And I think, as a little side note, I think he does actually have to win both those titles to maintain his world #1 ranking. So can he do that? That's quite interesting. Obviously, it is mainly very positive for China. You know, they won 4 titles, and 3 of them were all China finals. Absolutely couldn't really do much better. There are 2 concerns. One is in regards to the mixed doubles, and that is that, and this isn't just for the Chinese pair specifically, there's a couple of pairs that are in this boat as well, so this kind of applies to them, and that is that they've played both 500s before the 750 and the 1000. You know, I'm not quite sure what the reasoning is behind that, the rationale. Because, you know, these pairs, although they've been split up, Feng Zhou, Wang Yongping and Zhang Xinbang and Wei Yaxin, they were split up, so maybe the coaches wanted them to play more tournaments to get back used to each other. The split wasn't for that long, and clearly the 750 and 1000 are more important. So why were they playing both 500s? I would have thought maybe they'd have played one of them, maybe play Thailand, rest Malaysia, and then come back for Indonesia and Singapore, or skip Thailand, come in for Malaysia and play 3 back-to-back. The fact that they're going to play 4 back-to-back tournaments, it's a little bit surprising, because obviously China will want to win as much as they can, like all countries will do, and obviously they'll want to win the biggest events, the 750s and especially 1000s. So the fact that, you know, they put their top 2 mixed pairs, and one of them, Feng and Wang, have won back-to-back tournaments, are they going to, you know, be a little bit fatigued for the 750 and the 1000s? Or maybe are they going to see Singapore, maybe they're going to not worry too much about Singapore and use that as a kind of rest week or whatever, and then coming for Singapore? I don't know. It's a little bit interesting. There's other players, like I said, that are like that. Aaron Tai and Soba Yik are like that. You know, players like Dichapon and Subsara, or Dichapon has played 2 events at 2 Super 500s in a row. And obviously he's someone that's in contention for titles at 750s and 1000s. Are they doing a little bit too much heading into those events, or have they got their eyes on tournaments further in line like the World Championships and they're not too concerned? There's lots of ways. I'd love to hear your thoughts as to maybe you can try to rationalise that decision. It just stands out a bit to me that, you know, we didn't see anyone else, even if you look at Chen Yufei. She played for Thailand, but she's missed Malaysia, but she's coming back for Singapore and Indonesia. Why wasn't that the case for the mixed doubles? This is something that's just interesting to think about. And obviously the last one is that the one event where the Chinese players didn't do too well was the men's doubles, with Wang Chang and Liang Weikang losing very comfortably to Hoki and Kobayashi. I watched that match, and I was, especially having watched the other Chinese players and showing how well they were playing, I was really surprised at the level that they brought. They looked disorganised, their serves were loose, they didn't seem to really be playing with any sort of game plan or anything. They were just completely taken apart by Hoki and Kobayashi. It was just really surprising. I don't quite know. Maybe if anyone, you know, I don't follow Chinese media that much. Maybe they've had some issues, or maybe their training hasn't been as smooth, or whatever. If anyone knows anything more that can explain it away, then I would love to learn about that. But it was just, for me, really stood out. It wasn't just that they lost to the better pair on the day. It was just nothing was really working. They lost very badly, and there was very few glimpses, even within the match, of any sort of decent level coming from that pair. So can they turn it around for the 750 and 1000s? Of course they are more than capable of doing that, but they'd have to do an absolute 180 if they want to do well, because the level they showed in this week in Malaysia was far off what they should be at. So yeah, no, all in all though, aside from those 2 things, especially Wang and Liang, it was obviously a brilliant tournament for China, and with the way they're playing heading into the 750s, 1000s, they're going to be very difficult to beat, very difficult to stop. And I wouldn't be surprised if at either of those tournaments we see a few more all-China finals or China winning plenty more titles. Right, okay, Q&A. Thank you again everyone who sent their questions in over Instagram or on YouTube. I'm just going to answer a few here, some really interesting ones. As always, there's been a number of questions that I've already somewhat answered throughout this episode already. But okay, first one. Do you think Herry IP moving to Malaysia has affected how the Malaysian men doubles players have played? Obviously, Herry is a very, very experienced coach, been involved with Indonesian men's doubles from the early 2000s, all the way up to 2008, 2009, then came back around 2011 and only just stopped coaching there in a couple of years ago, and throughout that time created many world, Olympic and All England champions, world number ones. You know, his experience and ability to kind of get the best out of his players, find the right partnerships, get the right tactics, all that kind of stuff is, you know, it's second to none. He is probably rated as one of the best men's doubles coaches in badminton. And so, of course, I think the fact that him coming to Malaysia has had a huge positive effect on the Malaysian men's doubles squad. I think even if he hasn't been there long enough to have a really massive, a proper impact, really making good changes. But I think just based on what I just said there, I think if a coach like that came to you, if you were in a national setup, just that would bring you like, oh wow, this guy's created so many of this. Immediately, you have lots of confidence in him and all that kind of stuff. So I think just having him there just gave this little boost to the Malaysian men's doubles team. In terms of how they play, I've seen people talk about how Aaron Tai and Srikanth are a little bit more attacking, and there's lots of variation in their attacks, and they're not just Malaysian men's doubles pairs of past have been a little bit, I would say, prone to just relying on their defence. Malaysian men's doubles defence is probably what they're most known for, their strongest attribute, and I think it's quite clear that Herry is trying to obviously maintain that, but get them better in the attack, better in the service situation, better in the flat game, all that kind of stuff. And of course, I think he's had a very positive effect already. I mean, an all-Malaysian final here, Aaron Tai and Srikanth been to 3 consecutive finals, and Malaysia men's doubles, I mean, he's been going from strength to strength a little bit. It was getting strong before Herry turned up, and I think Herry being there came in at the right time when Malaysia have had all these kind of lots of promising players as well as some established ones. And I think his being brought in by BAM was just at the right time, and so I think we're going to see that continue, and it's really exciting. If you're a Malaysian fan, you should be very, very excited about what Herry can do with the men's doubles squad, because he's proven what he can do when he's given a talented bunch that are willing to work hard, and I think he's got that in these Malaysian players. Okay, so this guy actually asked me a few questions, but it was his last paragraph that I think was actually quite an interesting question. So even though it was an all Chinese mixed doubles final, are China in a good place in terms of mixed doubles? Because all the other pairs are kind of inconsistent outside of Feng and Wang. Or is there going to be a period now post World Championships where they might struggle a bit? I think with Chinese mixed doubles, the one thing they are lacking, although this might sound a little bit off, as Feng and Wang have won the last 2 tournaments they played and they went undefeated at the Sudirman Cup, is that China don't have that Zheng Siwei and Wang Yaochong style pair, or Zhang Nan, Zhao Yunlei, or even Gao Ling, Zhang Jun kind of pair. You know, that pair that will dominate the world badminton and win so many titles. I think if you go from Zhang Nan, Zhao Yunlei in 2010, 11, all the way through to now Zheng Siwei and Wang Yaochong only just retiring last year, they've always had a pair that's been pretty much the world's best and winning lots of tournaments, lots of majors, and obviously having vast long stints as 1-on-1. They don't quite have that pair that has that quality at the moment. Potentially one of them Feng and Wang might take what they've done and run with it. They don't quite give me that sense that they're going to be that pair. I don't think Feng Yanze is quite as good as Zhang Nan or Zheng Siwei, and obviously Wang Dongping is a little bit older, and as much as she is someone that loves playing badminton and will play as long as she can, I think we're more likely to see a Zheng Siwei Wang Yaochong pair out of someone that's young. We're not quite certain of. We haven't seen as much right yet. There might be one bubbling amongst just below the surface that's ready to come forward. is China mixed doubles in a good place? It certainly is. Like I said, they have got the world number 1, world number 2 pair. I think, obviously, I've spoken about Feng and Wang, Zhang and Wei. Zhang's been having a bit of a hard time recently. I think confidence is a bit knocked, but he is still an absolutely fantastic player. Physically, probably one of the best mixed players China's ever had in terms of his ability to move around the court. That's something Christian Luque actually told me, is that in terms of physicality and athleticism, he's even far better than Ng Tze Yong was, he said. But obviously, that's not everything in a badminton. Badminton is far more than just being athletic. But I think that, just because he's had some bad results recently, doesn't mean that he can't refine his form and become, get back to where he was and winning titles, etc. And also, over the last 2 weeks, we've seen 2 relatively new pairs. Last week in the final, this week in the semi-final, and they have plenty of others. And I think that, and obviously they have the All England champions, which is another pair. They've been struggling a bit so far on this Asian leg, Guo and Chen. But I still really rate Guo Junhua. I think he's fantastic. I think Chen Fanwei has definitely got stronger. And so there you already have 5 pairs that are all capable of getting to finals and winning these level of tournaments and above. So I think they're in a very healthy place. I do think mixed doubles has plenty of other pairs that can kind of get in there and disrupt and do that kind of thing. And so maybe in terms of absolute domination, again, it might not be as strong for China as it was in the Zheng Siwei, Wang Yechong and Wang Yilu, Wang Dongping era, where literally with those two just having finals every week. Maybe it won't be quite that dominant, but I still think they're in still a very healthy situation, and I still think they're going to be the nation to beat and the nation to look to when it comes to the mixed doubles. But yeah, no, again, only time will tell. Should Fadia, that's Ramadhanti, focus more on mixed doubles or the women's doubles discipline? She's been having kind of good success in both. I still do think, and this might be because she's just had a bit more experience as a women's doubles player, but she still strikes me as someone who's more suited to that. She does have lots of versatile skills that can help her in mixed doubles, but I do think she is better suited to the women's doubles discipline in terms of her skill set and the way that she approaches the game. I think if I compare her to the other female players that play predominantly mixed doubles for Indonesia, whilst I think she might be a slightly better badminton player, she definitely can move around the court a little bit better. What she lacks slightly is the vision that mixed doubles players need, when to come in, when to intercept. The kind of stuff that when I did the video on Lilian Natsir, she said that's kind of 50% taught, 50% like just you have it or you don't. I think Ramadhanti is an incredibly skillful player, but I'm just not quite sure she has the vision for the mixed doubles game. It can be learnt, I'm sure it can be improved upon, and only time will tell. But in all honesty, I think women's doubles is where her best discipline lies. Should that mean she should focus only on women's doubles? I think for now she could continue doing both, because she's just started new partnerships in both, and so it might be quite useful not to put all your eggs in one basket. Whilst I do think women's doubles is possibly where she's a bit stronger in, what's to say that she couldn't get better results than the mixed doubles, or with more time and more training start to change those things around? She might actually start to kind of get a slightly better eye for the mix. It might just be that because she hasn't played much of it, she's still in that adjustment phase, and if she then suddenly is able to get good results, then she can focus on one. But I think while she's still relatively young and injury free and doing well, she's doing well in both, why not continue in both? And then maybe by next year or before the Olympic qualifying starts, it might be wise to focus on one, especially if she's showing really good signs in one of them. But again, I think for now, playing both events is fine. The only thing I'll say is I do think women's doubles is more her discipline. Right, okay, that's it for today's episode. Again, I've spoken for quite a long time. I hope you enjoyed the episode. There's plenty to talk about. Some very interesting things, like I said, some good stuff, some bad stuff, and unfortunately some controversial stuff. Badminton does seem to not be able to get away from that thing, although I will say that you see controversies in all sports and all walks of life, so maybe we shouldn't expect less from our lovely sport of badminton. I just hope that the stuff that I've said today, make sense. I'm trying to be as respectful and see all sides as much as I can. I have no side that I'm on. I like to see myself as relatively neutral. I do have my preferred players. I do have my opinions about things, but I'm also someone that is very open to seeing the other side of things. If someone can explain it to me well, you know, I'm not someone who's going to be pig-headed and only stick to one side. So I hope that I've kind of shown that throughout this video. It's been it's in some respects a bit of a difficult one, that controversial thing to talk about, but I hope that I did it respectfully, and I hope that you got something out of it, like I hope you got something out of this episode in general. So if you made it this far, I do want to thank you for watching. Next week is the Singapore Open. It's a Super 750, so we go up a level. I love watching this Singapore Open because of how difficult the conditions are for the players. It's an incredibly drifty hall, probably the driftiest, maybe on a similar level. Indonesia's on a similar level to that, but yeah, no, the next 2 weeks with those ones are going to be very interesting with how the players can control the drift and all that kind of stuff. And obviously at Singapore we have a number of players coming back. We have Shi Yu Chi and a number of the Korean players like Ng Tze Yong, Kim Won Ho, Seo Sun Jae, Baek Han Na, and Lee So Hee, and a few others are returning after they took off the week in Malaysia. So of course I will be doing another Beckman's Breakdown this time next week on that tournament. So until then everyone, and see you later.